We begin right now with a congressman who once threatened Michael Cohen, Matt Gaetz, now engulfed in this ever-widening scandal. The Republican facing a House ethics investigation that is in addition and separate from the federal DOJ probe over these alleged possible sex crimes. Now, Gaetz' team is responding, quote, "These allegations are blatantly false and have not been validated by a single human being willing to put their name behind them," end quote. All of this comes amidst the new allegations that go beyond what we first heard about leaking out of the DOJ probe and now paint more of a picture. Many different outlets and reporters getting into this. There's talk of, quote, paying for sex, sex trafficking, and sex with an underage girl. As noted, Gaetz denies all of it and hasn't been charged with a crime. But he is speaking out, and that changes things at the end of what has been a bruising week for him. Tonight, Gaetz making his first public appearance. This should be at the top of the next hour. And that's the first time he'll really be facing anyone in any setting that we can see in the public since what was supposed to be a helpful but ultimately widely panned interview on Fox News, where Tucker Carlson said it was one of the weirdest interviews ever. Now, the group sponsoring this is Women for America First. It's a MAGA group, and they're holding the event at a Trump golf course in Miami. Now, Trump is not doing much to defend Gaetz, unless you count taking some money from that group. And there's a major sign today that the stakes remain quite high because Gaetz has added a new set of people to his legal team. He's also reportedly brought on a new public relations or crisis management firm to deal with all of this. Gaetz is in damage control mode, and his team says, quote, "Matt has always been a fighter. He's going to fight back against unfounded allegations against him," end quote. And that is how he's taking this up. The pressure on Gaetz, though, is growing. This entire investigation began somewhere, and it didn't begin, for example, going after Matt Gaetz. Indeed, you may recall he earlier emphasized that he saw himself as a subject, not a target. And based on the available reporting, there's no reason to think that it began with him as a, quote, target. For example, there's no indication that the DOJ simply was out to get a member of Congress, Matt Gaetz, or anyone else. No. What we do know, what is on the public record, is that the investigation that was further along was dealing with this associate, Joel Greenberg. And we know that he was indicted for sex trafficking and a host of other crimes. We know that Greenberg pleaded not guilty for allegedly stealing a $400,000 in taxes and charges of bribing a small business administration employee. But we also know that he's expected to plead guilty in the coming weeks. That's the reporting you may have seen in the newspaper, like the New York Times, as well as covered on The Beat, that there's these signs that he's pleading guilty and that he has a plan. That plan could involve, we're not confirming this tonight, but we've had experts and other papers discuss the possibility of that plan, including him cooperating against Matt Gaetz. Here's Greenberg's attorney when questioned on Gaetz' exposure.
Does Matt Gaetz have anything to worry about?
Does Matt Gaetz? That is such a...
when it comes to what happened today in court.
Does he have anything to worry about? And you're asking me to get into the mind of Matt Gaetz, right? And
well, from your mind.
From my mind.
Based on what your client does.
Based on what my client does. Okay.
And the fact that he's...
See, I thought if I kept on talking, I would avoid these questions and not to say, I'm sure Matt Gaetz is not feeling very comfortable today.
That is the entire set of remarks there. We wanted to play it in full context. Sometimes it takes more time in the news to give you the context. What you see is, a certain style of lawyering. It's certainly not the most precise or the most brief. But second, you see through mood or innuendo what is not stated under the words. So uncomfortable could mean any number of things. Indeed, we were parsing a similar statement by this lawyer on The Beat earlier this week. What you see in total is a lawyer who certainly isn't dismissing the idea that this situation, that his client could do things that make Gaetz uncomfortable, that hurt him legally, while he's also clearly trying to bob and weave and avoid saying too much if he hasn't secured yet a final confidential deal with the government. Now, the Republican Party has been pretty quiet on all this. One more mavericky Republican congressman, Adam Kinzinger, is now the first to call for Gaetz to resign. And meanwhile, the second Gaetz staffer has left the building, resigning as the scandal picks up heat. We're joined now by Melissa Murray, a law professor with New York University, Michelle Goldberg from the New York Times. Good to have you both here. Michelle, this is already a widening political, substantive, factual scandal for Mr. Gaetz, an ethics probe, which uses a different set of standards for a member of Congress than the higher criminal standard. And then there's a DOJ probe. What do you see here for someone who was one of the loudest avatars of Trumpism over the last few years?
Well, I think it's not a coincidence that Matt Gaetz came into office at the same time as Trump and spent the last 4 years living by what he thought was Trump rules, right? Where you kind of didn't have to pay attention to legal and ethical constraints on your most outlandish behavior. I mean, what they're reporting about Gaetz, it's not just the alleged crimes, it's the alleged sloppiness, right? It's not just paying for sex, but doing it on your public Venmo. And so I think that his political career has taken place in a climate of total impunity. And now he's in a radically different world. And I don't think he's had to live by sort of normal political standards before.
Yeah, I think those are all great points, which may explain what could look like recklessness or stupidity to some, based even on the public fact pattern before you get into charges. But as you say, may reflect a certain way of doing business that worked for some time for some people. It doesn't appear, from what we can tell, to be working for him. Professor, what did you think of the Greenberg lawyer's statement there?
Well, that was the most Florida of press conferences I think I've seen in a long time. And I say that as someone who grew up in the Sunshine State. But it seems very clear that Joel Greenberg is facing considerable legal jeopardy. There are 33 charges in that indictment. He is facing a mandatory minimum of 12 years. It could be decades more if he's found guilty on the other counts in that indictment. He has a lot of reasons, 33 really good reasons to sing about Matt Gaetz. And I think that's exactly what his lawyer was saying. He is uniquely situated to spin a narrative. Whether that narrative comes to fruition and it results in an indictment against Representative Gaetz is another matter. But he has a lot of reasons to cooperate with the prosecution.
Michelle, James Clyburn, very top, noticeable Democrat, speaking out. Take a listen.
Well, I certainly don't see a future for him in the Congress. I think at some point in time, he will be out of the Congress. It might be good for his party for him to do it on his own rather than to take the Congress through some kind of a vote.
Michelle?
I mean, I think that that's right, although it's interesting how, that you have only one Republican calling for him to leave. I think it's probably not a terrible thing for, Democrats, I'm sure, want him to resign. At the same time, it's not the worst thing in the world to have him, along with Marjorie Taylor Greene, as the twin faces of the Republican Party. And Matt Gaetz really is the ultimate avatar of what the Republican Party became in the Trump years. And then the other thing here is that he's been accused of a bunch of crimes. He's also been accused of behavior that's not criminal, but that is appalling, and that Congress kind of has to deal with if it's going to be, a remotely professional work environment at the very least, right? I mean, I don't know what the revenge porn laws are in Washington, D.C., but I don't think it's criminal to show off photos of your sex partners to your colleagues, but it's just not something that should be happening on the House floor. And we're going to see if Republicans agree with that even rock bottom standard of behavior.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.